Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at another chess opening, and this is the Scandinavian Defense. So without further ado, let's look at this. White starts by playing e4 and black plays d5. White takes on d5, and here black has two moves. Knight f6 is one move, and queen takes d5 is another. We're first going to be looking at queen takes d5, and white will play knight c3 here, and here black has three moves. Queen a5, queen to d6, and also queen to d8. We're first going to be looking at the move queen to d8. And if this move is played, then white plays d4, black plays g6, and now white develops his bishop out to f4. Black plays bishop g7, threatening the d4 pawn, but white plays the move queen d2. He plays it all cool, and the idea is that if black ever decides to capture on d4, then white is free to just castle queenside, and he's putting lots of pressure towards this d4 bishop. If you ever consider ideas like knight c6, then there's bishop b5. There's too much pressure towards a lot of these weak points, and if you try something like bishop to d7, then after knight d5, white is definitely better. You're threatening the c7 pawn, you're pinning this knight on c6, and I don't see how white can get any better of a position from here. So bishop d4 is not an option, and that is the move queen d8. You could also try the move queen to d6, and if this move is played, then white is just going to play g3, getting ready to fianchetto the bishop. Knight f6, bishop g2, c6, d4, bishop f5, knight f3, just normal development by both sides. White castles, black plays bishop e7, a3, castles by black, rook e1, and now queen c7, knight e5, rook d8, and now g4. G4, because there's no real other way of actually reinforcing the d4 pawn, so now white gets aggressive. So after g4, bishop g6, h4, and now there are threats not only on this bishop on g6, but if this pawn ever decides to move, then this pawn can be used as a hook. And there's really a lot of problems for black, mainly considering the fact that there's a threat of h5, and if this pawn moves to give the bishop shelter, then there's ideas like knight takes g6, and white would just get way better from that position itself. The last move that you can consider after the move knight c3 is actually just to play the move queen to a5. And if queen a5 is played, then this is the variation: d4, knight f6, knight f3, c6, knight e5. And even though white does move his knight at least 3 times in this position, he attacks the queen, and the knight is nicely centralized here. And after a couple of more developing moves, white should definitely be way better than black in this position. So that was the move queen takes d5. It's not actually as complicated as you think. But now we're going on to the real challenge, knight f6. And this is a gambit variation, and actually you don't have to play the move c4 to try reinforcing the pawn. And in fact, white is going to play this move d4. And he's willing to give up the pawn, because even though you could play c4 and you could hold on to the pawn, it's a very risky idea, and you need to be very careful when you calculate every single line. Whereas with d4, you're just giving the pawn back up, so there's not really much to calculate in this variation. There are two moves that you can play here, knight d5 and bishop g4. If bishop g4 is played, then you could play f3, which does maintain the pawn, but yet again, it's going to be a very complicated variation. So bishop e2, we have a trade, and now queen takes d5. White defends the pawn with knight f3, knight c6 by black, and now castles by white. Black castles queenside, white plays bishop e3, and now e6 by black. c4 by white, queen h5 by black, knight c3 by white, bishop d6, c5, bishop goes back to e7, and now white strikes with b4. And the idea is that if you do not take the pawn on b4, then there's just b5 and the attack has started way too quickly. So black captures the pawn, rook a b1, knight b d5. You have a trade of knights on the d5 square, knight e5 by white. And now, if you decide to play this move, bishop takes c5, then there's knight takes f7. There's also rook b5, which pins this bishop. So you do not really want to get into that variation. Instead, rook hf8 by black, just defending the f7 pawn, but now white goes c6. And now the position is very, very tactical, and white is way, way better. There's not really much way to defend against this threat on b7, and obviously if you capture, then you allow checkmate on a6. So this is a very tough position to defend against. So bishop g4 is one option, and another one is knight takes d5. White will play knight f3, and now black has two moves yet again, bishop g4 and g6. If g6 is played, then white plays the move c4, which chases the knight away. Knight b6, knight c3, bishop g7, c5 attacking the knight, knight goes to d5, and now bishop c4. You could capture the knight on c3, but it would give white a very centralized pawn structure, and even though white would have doubled pawns, it would be okay in this situation because of the initiative that white could get later on in the game. So c6, queen b3, both sides castle, knight c3, bc3, b5 by black, and now we have c takes b6 en passant, a takes b6, and now rook to e1. And here black will play b5, white will go bishop d3, and here black plays an interesting move. And this move actually invites a bit of trouble, but it's understandable when you think about it why black would play a move like this. Black plays the move bishop e6, which at first might seem like an okay move. I mean, black is in this position trying to put his bishop on the square d5, and from there it definitely could do a lot of things. Like, it would be putting pressure against the king. It would be putting pressure against the f3 knight, and with the inclusion of the queen, black would definitely get a good position. But the only thing is that white will play this move rook takes e6. Unfortunately, as black, you can't really play e6 because it's very slow and passive, and there's not really much that black can do after that, since, first of all, after e6, you invite ideas like bishop to a3, and maybe after something like rook to e8, maybe bishop c5 or bishop b4, and white would definitely be better with the amount of control he has over this diagonal, and you could see that white would definitely be better. So e6 doesn't work, so what does? You could try knight d7, but this blocks this bishop in, and we don't really see much use for this bishop later on. Bishop b7 puts the bishop behind a bunch of useless pawns, and bishop g4, even though it can technically be played, it would basically allow moves like knight g5 in the future. So it's understandable to see why black would play bishop e6, but it invites a lot of trouble. White plays rook e6, black takes on e6, and white executes this exchange sacrifice, not with the intention of winning material, but with the intention of just cramping black's position severely. Knight g5 by white, and obviously if black doesn't do anything, then white gets this knight f7 check move in, and then you're just winning the exchange back, and white would have an extra pawn. So queen d5, and now queen h3 by white. And what white is trying to do now is threaten checkmate on h7, and if you play queen g8, then you allow this move bishop takes g6, and you cannot take the bishop because your pawn is pinned to the king. And that is why black plays h6, but now after this move, knight e6 by white, white is definitely way better because there are threats like bishop takes h6 in this position, and white has a lot of threats like knight c7, and black doesn't have much ways to defend against all of these. So g6 doesn't work, but what about this move bishop to g4? Well, if bishop g4 is played, then white goes bishop e2, black plays knight c6, and now h3, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to h5, white castles, e6 by black, rook e1 is one move here, and another is c4. If c4 is played, then knight b6, b3, bishop e7, bishop e3, defending the d4 pawn, castles by black, and knight c3. And white's development is definitely way better than black's. After a couple of more moves, white is going to activate both his rooks, and white's rooks can nicely be placed on the d1 and e1 squares. The other move that you could try is rook to e1, but after this move is played, black plays bishop e7, white plays knight bd2, and now black castles. c3 by white, and now queen d7. Knight e4, and this is the end of the variation, because after this knight e4 move is played, maybe white will get ideas like knight g3, or even knight e to g5, which would get a very, very nice attack towards this h7 pawn, and essentially a very nice attack against this black king. So after this knight e4 move is played, that is the end of the variation, And I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned for more chess.